Okie dokie. Well, hello everybody. Nice to see you all. This is our I think it's a 22nd. I believe this is the 22nd session that I've done of how to teach foreign languages. I'm excited to do this one. This is going to be a very useful one. Funnily enough, I think it'll be useful for language learners and people who teach language alike. It'll be good for everybody, I think. So let's jump in without further ado. So this is a bit of a continuation of last week's session. Last week I was talking about a methodology for teaching foreign languages, and I was talking about a little bit of a framework, I suppose, for teaching foreign languages. And at the end of that session, one of the question marks I left that we didn't talk about was, what do you assign for homework, and what should that look like? And so today, that's what I'm going to be answering, is like, what kinds of things should you do between classes? So if you have a weekly class or something like that, what kinds of things should you do? So I've put together a little bit of a rule of three here. And the rule of three basically looks like, if you're taking 2 hours of class a week, you should probably do about 1 hour of homework per week. Or if you're doing about an hour of class a week, you should do about 2 hours of homework. So you're just trying to create about 3 hours a week of time going into the target language. If you can do more, that's fantastic, and that's probably better. Like, the more time you put into it, the more you'll learn, the faster you'll learn, and overall, the better it will be. But I think 3 hours a week is definitely a very, very good benchmark. Over the years, as I've taught different people, there definitely are people who put in less than 3 hours a week, and that is also okay. It's not necessarily a problem. It's just that their progress tends to be quite slow. Like, they really progress slowly. Like, after a year or two, they're better than they were before, but it was just slow progress, which again is not necessarily a problem, but it's definitely something worth noting. I think if you're putting in 3 hours a week and you follow a lot of the principles we talk about today, you're going to be in good shape, and you'll be making some noticeable progress, which will be motivating for you. And yeah, I don't think there's much else that needs to be said on that. So 3 hours a week is a good benchmark to aim for, to give your students, and of course on the language learning side, for you to actually put into the target language. Now, I think it's important to look at what the purpose of homework is, because I think some people don't fully utilize homework and their time between classes as effectively as they could. So there's 4 different things, there's 4 different purposes behind homework. The first one would be practicing difficult concepts. So for example, maybe you learn something in class and you kind of get it, but you don't fully get it, and your brain's still trying to wrap itself around how XYZ thing works, right? Something that you learned, and it's not fully setting in your mind. Maybe it's grammar, maybe it's how to pronounce something. Like, actually, I want to grab something. This is really good. We can do this in real time. This is very meta. Oh, this is my rough version, but that's okay. I'll just grab this one. So I've been learning a little bit of Korean. I've been learning a little bit of Korean lately. And like, I remember really struggling with the phrase, like, how do you say blah, 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 blah in Korean? So I have it written down here, and I would just practice it at home. I'd be like, wait, how do I say it? I'd like type it into Google Translate. I'd hit the record button so I can hear how the computerized Google voice says it. I'd go into YouTube and I would like search that phrase so I can hear how people say it, right? And I would practice it myself, like, blah, 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 어떻게 말해요? And I would just say it over and over the best I could. I try and copy them. Right? So it's like a version of practice, right? So practice is something that's good for homework. I'm a big fan of exploring any hobbies or interests that you have in the target language. So if you like cooking, I'm a big fan of you actually watching cooking videos in, for example, Korean. I'm a big fan of it. Even if you don't understand everything they're saying, even if you don't understand everything, and there's a lot that's going over your head, I think it's still very, very beneficial to watch, and which we're going to get into in a couple slides, actually. I think reinforcing what you learned in class is a great idea too. So for instance, maybe you did something in class and you understood it pretty well. And heck, maybe it wasn't even in class. Maybe you learned something somewhere else, like through some study at home program or whatever you're doing. And you do, generally speaking, have a good handle on it. But reinforcing is not a bad thing, because it takes time. It's like a muscle. You have to train a muscle. Well, there's nothing wrong with using homework as a tool to reinforce things that you have learned before. And then, of course, the fourth one would be furthering your learning. So this is where you're using YouTube videos and things on Google, etc., to learn things that you never actually learned in class, and you're learning additional things. And so as a teacher or a tutor, you might give additional resources, videos, etc., to students, so that they can learn other things outside of class. I'm a big fan of using Google and YouTube, whether it's from the learner's perspective or the teacher's perspective. What I mean by that is, if you need to find a resource, you need to go into Google and type in 15 variations of the question that you have in your head. Meaning, you're trying to find a resource to practice the past tense. You should Google quizzes to practice the past tense in French. How can I practice a past tense in French? What else would I search? Activities to practice the past tense in French, etc. And you're trying different searches on YouTube and Google to find what you're looking for. So use Google and YouTube to your advantage if you don't know what resources to use. So there's 4 different types of homework, or 4 different purposes rather of homework. Often I find people don't necessarily, they do 1 or 2 of the 4 more than the others. And I think it's important to do a little bit of all 4. Yeah, let's move on from there. So 4 types of homework. There's 4 different things. There's 4 different types of homework that one can do. There's 4 different types of practice you can do. In fact, maybe I should even retitle this slide. Maybe it's not 4 types of homework. In all reality, you could actually probably look at this almost like 4 different types of learning activities that you can do in a week. It's not even 4 types of homework, to be honest with you. It's 4 different types of activities that you might choose to do in the week. So the first one is a sonic soak. That's what I've called it. I gave it that name. I thought it sounds really cool. So a sonic soak is when you listen to things in the target language, even though you don't understand what they're saying. I think this little point here in green on the left-hand side is pretty important. You know, when you're assigning homework to someone that's a sonic soak homework, make sure it's clear to the student that, hey, the goal is not to try and understand. Do not try, oops, I have a typo here. Do not try to understand. There we go. You don't need to try and understand every word that you're hearing. All you're doing is your ears need to get accustomed and used to the sounds of the language. Otherwise, if you're not doing a lot of this kind of listening practice early on, you kind of get to that phase, you know, 1 or 2, 3 years in, or however long in, where you're like, you know, I can read the language just fine, but whenever I hear people speak it, I have no idea what they're saying. You can give me the same sentence written down, and I'm like, oh, I know what that means. I can read it quickly. I know it. I understand it. But when I hear that sentence, I have no idea what you're saying. Well, your ears haven't gotten used to the sounds of the language. In fact, it's not even that they're necessarily speaking quickly. Not necessarily. It's just that your ears don't recognize those sounds, or your brain doesn't know how to categorize them. So your brain goes, oh, it's just a bunch of blur, and it's just really blurry and fast. That's not really what's happening. Your ears just aren't trained. You have to train your ears. So you might listen to podcasts, YouTube videos, vlogs, music, TV, you know, talk shows, music, Netflix, news, etc. There's a lot of things you can listen to that are listed out over here that you would assign to students to listen to. Often when I assign this kind of homework, I'm very clear to tell them, just pay attention to the sounds of the language. Try to wrap your head around and really internalize what the language sounds like. For Korean, like I was actually taught the other 2 days ago, I was talking to myself in Korean with the 5th. I don't really speak any Korean. You know, like babies when they go like, blah, 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 and they babble to themselves nonsensically and it doesn't make any sense. I was doing that with myself in the basement in Korean, making no sense, but trying to imitate the sounds of the language. Just so I'm like, okay, what does it sound like? How do people pronounce it? Like, what are they doing here? So speaking is another thing you can do. There's a few options on how you can do speaking practice. You know, one, you might have private speaking lessons. If you're teaching them in a class, in a small group or private environment, they might already have that in their week. if you know what I mean. So maybe that may or may not be relevant. italki, if you haven't heard of it, it's a website where you can find private tutors for languages at varying prices. So that might be something you want to check out. I believe they have an app as well, but I think their website is a little bit easier to use. The last I checked anyway. Maybe it's changed since then. Eventbrite and Meetup, you would use the same way. So both are websites where you can find events that are taking place. So all sorts of events, not just language events. So what you'll use Eventbrite and Meetup for is their websites and apps where you can find often free, maybe even the majority of the time free, classes that are taking place for your target language. And more often than not, I find they tend to be quite conversational, and you can get some conversation practice like that and speaking practice. As you guys know, like, or you may or may not know, so at the Calgary Language Nerds, the business I run, we have weekly classes like this, which are typically quite conversational. We have some non-conversational parts. We talk about grammar, things like that, but there is some conversation practice in there too. And then, of course, HelloTalk might be an option you look into as well when you're talking to your students. So HelloTalk is an application where you sign up for the app. It's free. You indicate what language you're learning, what language you speak. So you're indicating 2 languages, and your pair, and then you can immediately in the app see other users who are learning the language that you speak as your first language, but speak the language you're learning as their first language. Does that make any sense? Basically, you would teach them your language, they teach you their language. So if I'm learning Spanish or whatever, Korean in this case, I would find a Korean person. They would help me, just an informal thing where they help me learn some Korean, they help me practice, and I help them practice English. So that's also an app that may be worth recommending to students and giving them homework around using HelloTalk as the app. I'm going to one day, I've actually already started working on it, have a session on HelloTalk best practices, because it's, even though it's super user-friendly to use, there are some best practices that are good to, that it's important to be aware of. Otherwise, you get people have hit and miss results with HelloTalk. Some people love it. Some people have a not even bad experience. Some people use it and it works really well for them. Some people use it and it's not a very effective strategy. And usually 9 times on 10, the people that struggle with HelloTalk, it's because there's a lot of best practices that you just kind of have to know going into it. I've used it a lot. I've done a lot of language exchanges, so I kind of have a lot of experience with it. So I love language exchanges. I continue to use that as a resource. And I've met plenty of, I've personally met people that way. It's like, oh, I get to practice with them and it's really useful. And I've connected people I've met people as well who love that app and live on it and live and breathe on that app and absolutely love it and use it all the time. So that's a second type of homework. Now we get a third type of thing that you can do to practice, which is utilizing comprehensible input. Now this is a linguistic term. And basically it's where you're watching something, you're consuming content where you understand the gist of the words, maybe not all of them, but you understand 100% of what's happening because of the context, right? With comprehensible input, usually you're aiming for things where you understand the most of the words. You can get away with understanding the gist. So if you're really only understanding 50% of the words or something like that, you can still get away with that and still take a lot away from it. But what happens when you consume content like that is your brain, the subconscious part of your brain, starts to actually identify the meaning of certain words. And you actually start to get your brain's like, oh yeah, I kind of know what that word means. Like I was watching a show a TED Talk on YouTube in Mandarin, because I'm also learning Mandarin and have been learning Mandarin for a long time now. So I'm watching a TED Talk and I'm understanding, probably 80, 85, 90% of what the guy's talking about and what he's saying. And there's certain words he uses that I don't know, but because I understood everything he said before that, or most of what he said before that, with context, I know kind of what that word means. And then my brain's kind of figured it out. I'm like, oh, okay, that kind of makes sense. And then it's especially solidified. I remember looking at that word up in the dictionary, and then it especially got solidified because the dictionary confirmed what I thought in my head. And I was like, yeah, that's what I thought it meant. So comprehensible input's a really big tool that you'd use. And I would, as a tutor, as a teacher, I would encourage you to probably help the student find the right resources for them, because they might not know how to find things that are comprehensible for them. They might not know how. So it's important for you as a tutor / teacher to help them figure that out and find that. Some examples, this green little section here is probably the #1 thing. I'm going to change this color. I don't like this green. There we go. I like that better. This one here is probably your best option. Have them record your lesson, record every lesson, and then have them watch the lesson again as part of their homework. That's definitely comprehensible because they know what the heck you talked about, right? They know what you talked about in class. It's good for their listening comprehension again. It's nice. It's good for them to hear what they sound like, because they'll realize, oh, I don't sound so natural, do I? Ooh, I say things like that. I shouldn't do that. And they'll notice patterns they have that they should change. So this is like a staple. There's you can use this website here. That's one screen recorder, but there's plenty of other softwares. I've used this one personally, apowersoft.com/free-online-screen-recorder. I've used that myself. Other options, like instructional videos, cooking, art, music, singing, yoga, maybe how to build something. Like anything where the person's teaching you something is really good, because you can physically see what they're doing with your eyes. And then if you understand 40, 50, 60, 70, 80% of the words, and then you see what's happening, you'll piece together the rest with context of what's happening. Some languages have like their video series that are literally designed to teach you the language. They're kind of using very specific language and situations to help you kind of learn the language. And they're kind of like sitcoms or things like that. Not every language has those, but many do. So you might look at something like that. For intermediate students, you might look at shows on Netflix, right? But it's important when you watch shows on Netflix, don't look up every word. Only look up words and phrases at major plot points. You need to tell your students that, because people, otherwise they get lost and confused and they start to look up all the words and it's overwhelming. No. Only have them look stuff up on major plot points, where if they don't look it up, they're going to be lost for the rest of the show. They're not going to understand what's happening. So that's a big thing you can do. In fact, a random little side note I'll throw in. If you're a beginner level, more on the beginner side, and you're trying to watch a show, and you have a student like that, what I'd recommend is you tell them to turn on English subtitles and to only pause and look up words when they actually have a hope and a prayer of making a connection between what this person said and what the subtitle says. For example, I was watching an interview in Korean. I've had 5 hours of Korean study, period. So I speak like no Korean. I know nothing. I was watching an interview on YouTube with English subtitles. I understand nothing. There's no hope of me piecing together the sounds they're saying, the words they're saying, and the words in the English subtitles. I have no prayer. I don't know how the heck I do it. I wouldn't be able to. It'd be so hard, right? But sometimes, like I remember the interviewer asked the interviewee, so what did you use for lighting? And that's what the subtitle said. And the guy said, lamps. And he said it in Korean. One word, one English subtitle. I was like, oh, I could learn that word. I paused, I rewinded, I listened again. He said it again. Oh, I've already forgotten what the word is, but whatever. And I was like, oh, I could learn that. Oh, that means lamps. Oh, okay. Do you see what I mean? I heard one word, saw one word of the subtitle. I heard him say one word. I was like, oh, I can make that connection. Just a random little side thing I'll throw in there for you. And then the last type of homework is traditional homework. Quizzes, worksheets, reviewing grammar, reviewing your notes, right? Reviewing/rewriting, not rereading, rewriting. There we go. Reviewing or rewriting your notes, apps, flashcards, listening comprehension exercises, reading comprehension exercises, writing exercises, journaling, whatever. This list could go forever. That's the majority of what you see when you look at language learning programs, classes, etc. It tends to kind of fall into a traditional bucket for the most part, at least in my eyes, traditional bucket. I'm not against doing it. I think it's very useful. I personally do very traditional styles and strategies. I have nothing against it. I think it's really, really good. I just think that it can't be the only thing you do. You've got to have a good mix of, doing some sonic soaks, speaking, comprehensible input, and of course your traditional homework. So that basically wraps up. Let me stop the screen share. That kind of wraps up the recorded portion of this. So recorded people, goodbye. I will see you later. And then, of course, you have a few people here watching live too, and who we can jump into some Q&A and discussion altogether. So recorded people, goodbye. See you next time.